HarperCollins presents The Motion of the Body Through Space by Lionel Shriver. Read by Laurence Bouvard. The glory of suffering might be humankind's biggest, ever-recyclable con trick. Melanie Reed, The World I Fell Out of. Clearly his personal god, or chi, was not made for great things. A man could not rise beyond the destiny of his chi. The saying of the elders was not true, that if a man said yea, his chi also affirmed. Here was a man whose chi said nay, despite his own affirmation. Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. Chapter 1.
I've decided to run a marathon.
In a second-rate sitcom, she'd have spewed coffee across her breakfast. Yet Serenata was an understated person, and between sips. What? Her tone was a little arch, but polite.
You heard me.
Back to the stove, Remington studied her with a discomfiting level gaze.
I have my eye on the race in Saratoga Springs in April.
She had the sense, rare in her marriage, that she should watch what she said. This is serious. You're not pulling my leg.
Do I often make statements of intent and then pull the rug out, just fooling? I'm not sure how to take your disbelief as anything but an insult.
My disbelief might have something to do with the fact that I've never seen you run from here to the living room.
Why would I run to the living room?
The literalism had precedent. They called each other out in this nitpicking manner as a matter of course. It was a game. For the last 32 years, you've not once trotted out for a run around the block. And now you tell me with a straight face that you want to run a marathon. You must have assumed I'd be a bit surprised.
Go ahead then, be surprised.
It doesn't bother you. Serenata continued to feel careful. She didn't care for the carefulness, not one bit. That your ambition is hopelessly trite?
Not in the least,
he said affably.
That's the sort of thing that bothers you. Besides, if I decline to run a marathon because so many other people also want to run one, my actions would still be dictated by the multitude.
What is this? Some bucket list notion? You've been listening to your old Beatles records and suddenly realize that When I'm 64 refers to you? Bucket list, she repeated, backing off. Where did I get that? Indeed, incessant citation of the now commonplace idiom was exactly the sort of lemming-like behavior that drove her wild. That allusion did a grave injustice to lemmings. In the documentary that propagated the mass suicide myth, the filmmakers had flung the poor creatures over the cliff. Thus, the popular but fallacious metaphor for mass conformity was itself an example of mass conformity. Okay, there was nothing wrong with adopting a new expression. What galled was the way everyone suddenly started referring to their bucket list in a breezy, familiar spirit that conveyed they had always said it. Serenata began to push up from her chair, having lost interest in the news from Albany on her tablet. It had only been 4 months since they'd moved to Hudson, and she wondered how much longer she'd keep up the pretense of a connection with her old hometown by reading the Times-Union online. She herself was only 60, though hers was the first generation to append only to such a sobering milestone. Having remained in the same position for half an hour, her knees had stiffened, and extending the right one was tricky. Once it had seized, you had to straighten it very slowly. She never knew, either, when one of the knees would do something creepy and unexpected, suddenly go pong, seeming to slip slightly out of joint and then pop back in again. This was what old people thought about and talked about. She wished she could issue a retroactive apology to her late grandparents, whose medical kvetching she'd found so trying as a child. Underestimating the pitiless self-involvement of their nearest and dearest,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?